Okay, good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday, which means Halacha and Tanya. Tonight's class is again dedicated to the memory of Kli SheMelachto Rabbi Yosef Shusterman, whose yahrzeit is tonight and tomorrow. Dalit Shvat, sponsored by the Maisel family. They're a very important family from day one of our shul. They're always with us. So it's in his memory, and his neshama should have an aliyah.
Amen.
Last time in Halacha, we were learning about the dinim of Muktzeh, and we're learning about things that are prohibited to read. Things that are prohibited to read on Shabbos, like for instance, anything that has to do with business. We're talking about telephone books, flyers that you get in the mail, circulars that advertise all these things. Real estate things that the house is sold, for sale, whatever it may be. All those things are definitely Muktzeh on Shabbos. So anything that has to do with business, which means basically anything contracts, bills, checks, cash, anything like that is Muktzeh, because you're not allowed to read them on Shabbos. If you're not allowed to read them on Shabbos, it's a classification, like we learned, of what's called Kli SheMelachto LeIsser. Its primary purpose is for something forbidden, and therefore you wouldn't be allowed to move it only if you need the place or you want to use something permissible with it. Now, for instance, newspapers and periodicals, okay? Generally speaking, there's a big argument. I know people are not going to like this too much, but let me just give you a brief introduction to this. The day of Shabbos is a holy day. It should be spent learning, davening, sleeping is enjoyable on Shabbos, family time. So therefore, for instance, newspapers, periodicals, all those things, ideally, according to many opinions, are not allowed to be read on Shabbos, because it's not what the day of Shabbos is all about. Number one, when you read the newspaper, you can get very depressed. All the news that's going on in the world, it's a disaster. So it can make you depressed. You read about the price of food going up and inflation and the dollar is worthless. And, those are things that are very distressful. So, and depressing. So, B'chal, it's not a good thing to read those books on Shabbos. Now, you have to be careful also, even if you have a newspaper, we learned that you're allowed to read, but you have to be careful not to read advertisements, because this is what we learned last week yet, because advertisements are also dealing with business subjects. Now, books of wisdom, like science books, medical books, physics, biology, those things. According to many opinions, Al Rebbe writes also the world is makel. They also could be read, but he writes, shouldn't be spending a lot of time on that because Shabbos is a holy day. Okay, now what about mail? You get a mail delivery on Shabbos. So seriously, the poskim really write, ideally, mail should be treated like Muktzeh. Number one, you have bills, okay? You got bills which are Muktzeh. You might get checks which are Muktzeh. What else is there in the mail? There's a lot of junk mail. Is junk mail. So then anyway, it's not worth anything. In the time of the Gemara, we learned that the people used to put it on as a bottle stopper. Yeah, but today it's not done. It's not that people don't use bottle stoppers today. So then, they do, but not with newspapers. So therefore, if you're planning to use it as a bookmark, yeah, then it's not Muktzeh. But if it's a bill or a check, you're not planning to use it as a bookmark because you're either going to have to pay the bill or deposit the check. So then it's basically Muktzeh. Now, many poskim write the same thing with letters. There's no function, and therefore, you can't even move. According to many opinions, you can't remove mail from the mailbox on Shabbos. And again, even if you might be now, once it's in your hand, or by the way, what happens if you're allowed to carry and you're afraid the mail is going to get stolen? Today you have an issue. Let's say they leave a package outside your door. Okay. The package, let's say, is not Muktzeh, but it was delivered on Shabbos. So the din is, it might be Muktzeh, by the way, depending what is in the package. It might be Muktzeh. But if you're afraid it's going to get stolen, okay, so sometimes even then you're not allowed to move it. You can kick it in, you can move it with a shinui a little bit differently, way of moving. But a lot of these things, it might be Muktzeh, and therefore they suggest, Rabbi Yosef Shusterman, others suggest people should not look at mail, move mail, and things like that. Okay, that's basically this category of Muktzeh. Now, certain things the Chachamim said are Muktzeh because if you move them, you might come to something forbidden. And we'll explain, you'll see cases in a second what that means. Because if we allow you to move them, they will come to do something forbidden. So therefore the Chachamim said that they're Muktzeh. Now, friends, to give you some examples of this. Wet laundry, okay? Now, a cloth which is wet, and if you squeeze it on Shabbos, there's two averos, two halachos involved. One halacha is squeezing, which is forbidden. It's a halacha of an offshoot of what's called dosh, which is threshing, which is removing something from the place it's concealed in. So that's forbidden. And secondly, when you squeeze out a cloth, you're actually cleaning the cloth also many times. Let's say you have dirty water in the cloth and you squeeze it out, so then you're actually cleaning the cloth, which is the malacha of libun. So sometimes if a person squeezes a sponge, a cloth on Shabbos, they're doing two things wrong. Number one, they're squeezing, which is forbidden biblically, and it's also forbidden to clean garments. And by squeezing it, sometimes you're going to clean garments. So therefore, like this, you have to be careful that when it comes to touching garments that are wet, I'll give you an example. You have wet laundry, okay? Laundry that's wet is Muktzeh because you can't use it. So even if it was wet bein hashmoshes, it means when Shabbos began between sundown and nightfall, that still remains Muktzeh. Once something is Muktzeh, when Shabbos begins, it remains Muktzeh for the duration of Shabbos. I will soon see.
What if it's just damp?
Damp is that if it's in a way that you can't squeeze liquid out of it, then it's not called wet, and then it's not Muktzeh. But we'll soon see some very simple practical cases by this. Okay, this maybe this year was practical in California so far. You get caught in a rainstorm. Okay. Now the question is, can I continue wearing the garments? Because when I walk, water is being squeezed out of the garment, especially if you're drenched. So therefore, in that case, you're allowed to, okay? Because the Chachamim said you're wearing it already. I mean, you could continue wearing it. By the way, what happens if you get drenched in a rainstorm and you're going to take off your clothing? So number one, let's say your pants are sopping wet. You have to be careful when you take them off that you're not going to be squeezing water out of the pants or blouse or dress or whatever it may be, because then you're squeezing water. You have to be very careful how you take it off. Secondly, you're not allowed to hang it up in a place where people normally hang clothing. Let's say you have in the house a rack where you hang, they don't have them so because today we have dryers. But let's say, in the house, used to, besides the clotheslines outside. But let's say you have a clothes rack, that you hang clothes. People, that's what it's made for, to hang clothes when it's wet, that they should dry. Garments that became wet on Shabbos, you're not allowed to hang up on such a thing. Why? because people will think you washed it on Shabbos with something called marasayin. You can't do something that gives the impression that you might have done something wrong. Okay? So for instance, let's give you another example of this. Let's say you have a clothesline, okay? And you had wet clothing. And they were washed before Shabbos. Now I want to come along on Shabbos and hang them up to dry on the clothesline. I'm not allowed to do that on Shabbos. Why am I not allowed to do that on Shabbos? Because people will think that I washed the clothing on Shabbos. So I wouldn't be allowed to do it because, again, Marasayin, people will get the wrong impression. So if you have this clothes, one second. If you have this clothes rack in your house, this thing to hang up clothing, what after you wash them in the machine, you wouldn't be allowed to hang them there on Shabbos. You can hang it over in the shower, you can hang it because that's not where people normally hang clothing that they washed, or in other places in the house. But to hang it in a place where you normally hang clothing, you wouldn't be allowed to. Now, secondly, you have to be extremely careful that you can't hang it and dry it near a heater, because then it's going to make the clothing hot, and then it's a shot of cooking. You might, if it gets very hot from the dryer, then you couldn't do it. Let's say you have a radiator or a heater, and you're going to want to take your jacket that's wet, or your blouse, the shirt, whatever, that's wet, and you want to hang it over the dryer, over the heater, the room heater. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos because you might be cooking the water. You have to keep everything in mind, and halacha keeps everything in mind of what you have to be careful, because then you might be either that people will think you laundered in the Shabbos, or it might come to people think you'd wash, or you might come to heat up the water, which is forbidden. So therefore, let's say wet towels. Okay, now towels that became wet. Let's say you had a spill on Shabbos. Okay, and you had pre-cut paper towel. You're not allowed to cut paper towel on Shabbos. Okay, what happens if you have pre-cut paper towel? Okay, you had a spill on the table. Somebody spilled a cup of water. So you're allowed to put it on you can't rub it because then you're squeezing water out of the paper towel, which is forbidden. But what happens if you just, put it on the table or the floor, and then now the paper towel is wet. So that's not muktzeh, okay? Some people say because nobody's interested in squeezing it out, because you're throwing it out. But you have to be careful when you dry up a spill that you don't squeeze the paper towel, because then you're squeezing on Shabbos, which would be forbidden. So you have to just carefully pick it up, and at the end of it, to make sure you have a basin or something that you wouldn't spill the water all over the floor. The same thing, sponges. Okay? Sponges are muktzeh on Shabbos. Sponges, you're not allowed to use a sponge on Shabbos. Why are you not allowed to use a sponge on Shabbos? So we just discussed, because you are squeezing water out of the sponge when you use the sponge. So on Shabbos, when you wash your dishes, you're not allowed to use a sponge. Okay? Therefore, a sponge is a vessel whose primary use is for something forbidden. Therefore, it's Kli SheMelachto LeIsser. So a wet sponge you can't move because you're going to inevitably squeeze water out of the sponge. Therefore, halachically, by the way, if you have a spill, the way you should clean it up is not with a sponge. You should clean up with better not even with the shmata. It's better to use, if you have to use paper towel, pre-cut paper towel, like we said, because you're not going to squeeze it out, because the paper you just throw in the garbage. The shmata you're going to reuse, and you might want to squeeze it out. But again, paper towel that's wet is not muktzeh. That's an exception to the case, by the way. But scouring pads, sponges, those things are muktzeh. When they're wet, then they definitely become completely muktzeh the whole Shabbos. If it was dry when Shabbos began, Kli SheMelachto LeIsser, its primary use is for something forbidden. So again, if you need the place or you want to do something permissible with it, then you're allowed to use it, to move it. Otherwise, you're not allowed to move it. So people have to keep in mind, not only are you not allowed to use sponges on Shabbos, but because you're not allowed to use sponges on Shabbos, therefore it has a din of Kli SheMelachto LeIsser, and it is Muktzeh. If it's a wet sponge when Shabbos began, it's even worse, because then it wasn't usable at all when Shabbos began, and therefore it remains Muktzeh the entire Shabbos. Okay, another thing the Chum said is Muktzeh, when something fell off, and I'll give you cases, which will be very simple and very clear. Something that broke on Shabbos, it's still usable, but the Chacham said it's Muktzeh because you might put it back on Shabbos and fix it. So therefore the Chacham said that becomes Muktzeh, because you might come, even though it's a keli. I'll give you an example, furniture legs. A leg of a chair, table, or couch became detached, okay? You're not allowed to put it back into the socket on Shabbos. Why not? Because now you're fixing something broken. The chair was broken, you couldn't sit on it, so now you're making it sittable, which is incorrect English. But then you're making it able to sit. So therefore, you're fixing on Shabbos. Therefore, because you're not allowed to put it back, the Chachamim said that table leg is Muktzeh. Why? Again, rabbinic decrees. Why is it Muktzeh? Because you might come to fix something on Shabbos with it, and that you wouldn't be allowed to do. So therefore, the leg is Muktzeh. Now, not only that, what happened if the leg broke on Shabbos? So you have a three-legged chair, a three-legged table. So you want to prop it up against the wall, or another chair that, as a fourth leg that fell off. That you're not allowed to do on Shabbos either. That's still fixing the table, because you just took a table that's not usable and you made it usable by putting it next, either putting a chair as the fourth leg, because you're fixing it, and fixing it you're not allowed to. Therefore, in that case, it would be a problem. Now, what happened if the leg is missing or broken? Okay, and it was there before Shabbos. No, I'm sorry. Okay, but that case, it doesn't make sense. Okay. Now, what happens if you're using the furniture without a leg? It was propped up against another chair, and that chair was taken away. So then it's not muktzeh because you were using it like that. So then the chair you could put it. Now, obviously, if the table broke and it's a fear that somebody might get hurt, the table might, God forbid, fall on somebody or something like that. So then it wouldn't be, then you would be allowed to move it. Now, I just want to mention one thing. If the leg broke, in other words, until now, okay, let's say, make this clear. If the leg was detached, you're not allowed to put it back. If you're not allowed to put it back, then you can't, it's muktzeh. If the leg is missing or broken, then the furniture is not muktzeh, because the furniture itself is a keli. So then you're not going to fix it because you can't fix it, it broke. Sticking it back into the socket, anybody could do that. If the leg cracked in half and it's not usable, then the leg is muktzeh, but the table is not muktzeh, because we're not afraid you're going to fix it. So then you would be allowed to use the table. A handle that became disconnected, like the handle of a hammer or an axe or whatever. Another case, which is more practical, a wheel of a bike fell off. Okay, bicycles, we learned you're not allowed to ride on Shabbos anyway, so they're muktzeh. But what happens if somebody has a baby carriage? Okay, Baby carriage, you're allowed to, where there's a native, you're allowed to, or now you're allowed to move a baby carriage. What happens though, if the baby carriage, the wheel fell off it? Then the wheel is muktzeh, and then the baby carriage becomes muktzeh because you can't use it. So it's a broken keli that's not usable. If you can still use it for the original usage, even with the wheel not there, then it's not muktzeh, but the wheel is muktzeh. Why? Because we're afraid that you might put the wheel back, and that's fixing on Shabbos. So the Chachamim said the wheel is muktzeh. Another example of this would be, let's say, disconnected eyeglass temples. Okay. Now, let's say this, right? That's the temple. If it falls off, that temple is muktzeh. Are the glasses muktzeh? So it depends what the case is. If you can still wear it, with one temple instead of two, it's not muktzeh. Then the glasses are not muktzeh. If you can't wear it like that, then the eyeglasses are muktzeh. Okay? But if it's the one fell off and you're still able to use it, then it's not muktzeh. So again, the bottom line of this, the last thing we learned the last few minutes, is very simple. If something broke or fell off and you were afraid you're going to put it back on, and you're not allowed to put it back on because then you're fixing something on Shabbos, it's called the melacha makeh bepatish. You're putting the finishing blows on something and making it usable. So then, because you're not allowed to do it, then in addition to that, the wheel, the handle, everything is muktzeh. Somebody asks, can you gently move a wet sponge on Shabbos? No, because it's called psik reisha. It's inevitable that it's going to squeeze water out of it. And even though your intent is not, it's still inevitably going to squeeze out. And you do want it to squeeze out because you still want to use the sponge. So generally speaking, sponges should be put away before Shabbos, just in a practical way that you don't come, number one, you don't come to use it because people just, subconsciously will just see the sponge there to wash a dish with a sponge, which you're not allowed to. And you have to make sure that you have pre-cut paper towel in case it spills or whatever it is. And then it wouldn't be too much of an issue. Okay, there's another example over here, another muktzeh, what's called muktzeh machmas mitzvah. Okay, now because they're designated for a particular usage of a mitzvah, I'll tell you some cases of that. Because they're designated for mitzvah purposes only, they become muktzeh. To give you a simple example, Chabad, we don't decorate sukkahs. But people that decorate sukkahs, with decorations and fruit and all that stuff, they decorate the sukkahs. Those decorations are muktzeh for 7 days of sukkahs. Even Chol Hamoed, you're not allowed to move them. Why? Because they're muktzeh lemitzvah. They are designated for the purpose of a mitzvah. And because they're designated for a purpose of the mitzvah, so then you're not allowed to do it. Because it's nothing to do with Yom Tov or Shabbos. Because it's designated for the mitzvah, you hung it up on the wall, it has to stay there. And if it fell off, you can't move it. It's not a din of Shabbos and Yom Tov, it's a din of another type of muktzeh, machmas mitzvah. I'll give you another example. An esrog on Shabbos, okay? Now, for instance, an esrog, which was designated for a mitzvah of sukkah, you're not allowed to eat it all 7 days of Yom Tov. All Yom Tov, not only during the Yom Tov day. You're not allowed to eat it during Chol Hamoed. You don't need it anymore, whatever. You're not allowed to cut up an esrog and squeeze it into your tea because it's muktzeh. Now, Shabbos, an esrog though, an esrog is allowed to be smelled. You could smell an esrog. Therefore, and because it and Shabbos, because it could be smell, you can smell it. Therefore, it's not muktzeh. But you can't eat an esrog, even cholamayit. Or let's say Hanukkah oil that was left in the container. That after Hanukkah, if you didn't make a condition before, and we learned you have to burn it. So that is muktzeh. And Shabbos Yom Tov, you can't move it. Why? Because that oil, even though oil is not muktzeh, oil is a food. The fact that muktzeh was designated for a mitzvah, it becomes muktzeh. A shofar and Rosh Hashanah, if you're not blowing it, it's muktzeh. It's designated for the mitzvah. You can't use it for anything else but a mitzvah. So obviously, if you're holding in your hand because you want to go blow shofar for somebody, or you want to try it and see if you're able to blow it, yeah, obviously then it's not muktzeh. But because shofar was designated for the mitzvah, it could only be used for the mitzvah. So if you want to use a shofar, whatever, it's a bookmark or whatever it is, you wouldn't be allowed to move it on Yom Tov. Shabbos definitely not. Shabbos you're not allowed to blow shofar, so for sure the shofar would be muktzeh. Like for instance, even candles, Yom Tov candles. Yom Tov candles are designated for the mitzvah. Okay, what happens if you have let's say for whatever reason the candle burned down halfway and then blew out? So now you have a half a candle left, right? That half a candle, because it was designated on Yom Tov for candles, for a mitzvah, you're not allowed to use that candle for anything else but a mitzvah, even though on Yom Tov you're allowed to light a fire from a pre-existing flame. Nevertheless, you would not be allowed to light that candle for anything else but a mitzvah. But because the unused portion has mitzvah use, you can use it for a mitzvah. Therefore, it's not muktzeh Yom Tov because you're allowed to light it for a mitzvah purpose. But like we learned, on Shabbos, though, a candle is completely muktzeh, especially the candle that was lit. If a candle was lit, 4 Shabbos candles, that's Shabbos. And half of it, after halfway down, it blew out. That candle is completely muktzeh, cannot be used if you need the place. It cannot be used if you want to do something. It is completely muktzeh. Why? Because you can't light it. And it can't be used for anything else but the mitzvah. And the mitzvah you're not allowed to do. Yom Tov is a little bit different because Yom Tov for a mitzvah, the leftover candle you could use if you have a pre-existing flame. Therefore, conceptually, it's usable. If it's usable, it's not. Then it's not the category of muktzeh. Okay, we're going to leave here. We're going to go to Tanya.